Well, hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Reading Michael Jackson. I am your host, Lena, and I am very happy to be here with you today. Today is a special day to me. So I am recording this on Monday, October 13th, 2025. And today is kind of special to me. And it is because today marks the 1-year anniversary, I guess, from when I first visited Neverland last year. Perhaps you listened to my June 25th bonus episode that I released, in which I recalled in significant detail my trip to California last fall, specifically my trip to visit Neverland. And if you did, then you'll know what I'm talking about. You know that that was a highly emotional, highly, I guess, transformative experience in a lot of ways. If you haven't listened to that and you are curious, I highly recommend it, that you return to the June 25th bonus episode. In that episode, I actually primarily read a piece that I had written about my experience driving up from Los Angeles to Santa Ynez, California, and visiting the gates of Neverland. To be very clear, only the gates. But it was interesting because this morning I was thinking about this. In fact, actually, for the last week, I've been really thinking about it. Like, I don't want to miss the anniversary. And I don't know why. I don't know why I felt like this was something I had to commemorate in my own mind and in my own way. Because what can I do? It was something I did a year ago, and it doesn't feel like it should mean that much to me, but it really does. It was such an incredible experience to go there. I think that visit, in a way, may have been part of the spark for me wanting to create a project like this around Michael. It was during that visit that I actually developed a thesis for the book I do hope to someday write about Michael Jackson. And I know that, there are people who listen to this podcast that are not based in the United States, that are, for them or for you, it may be even harder to imagine coming to the US, going to California and visiting Neverland. But I do live on the opposite coast. And if you're familiar with traveling in the United States, it's a substantial trip to go to California. Not as substantial, of course, as going from Australia, but it's a big trip. It's not the same as traveling around some other continents might be. So I guess you could say I feel like, I don't know when I'll be back there. And I remember when I left, I felt a sense of sadness and longing already to return. It was a very weird feeling because I think for a lot of people, visiting a place, it's like once you get there, okay, what do you do? Whereas for me, when I visited Neverland, I did not want to leave. I felt really, really connected emotionally to Michael and to the land and everything. And so the last thing I wanted to do was leave, but I had to leave. I had no choice. I had to leave. So I stayed as long as I physically could, and then I left. And I've thought about that experience almost every day in the last year. I mean, I think about it all the time. Sometimes when I meditate, which to be honest, I'm not very good at, and I don't do with any consistent practice, but I've been told it's helpful to kind of envision a place of significant peace. And I almost always think of Neverland. It's a weird thing, given that I was only at the gates, given that I never went into the property itself. I don't know why it had the effect on me that it did, but I do try to explore that in that episode. So anyway, if you are interested and you want to live vicariously through that experience, it's very detailed. And if you've ever wondered what it was like to travel around LA or travel up to the California coast and to that part of the world, it may be of interest to you. So definitely check it out if you think that might be something you want to know more about. But with that said, I am in this pensive mood today. It is cold and rainy, and it feels like October, and how October ought to feel rather in this part of the world. And so I am in a cozy yet uncertain mood. And so I'm not sure how this will go today. We'll see. I am excited and yet anxious that this is the end of the book that we're at. We have only 2 pieces left, which is like crazy to me. So this second to last, or this penultimate piece, you might say, I'm really looking forward to. I'm really looking forward to it while in this kind of contemplative mindset about Michael and about the passage of time and all of these things. I'm looking forward to it. So without further ado, I would like to now invite you to, of course, relax, get comfortable, get cozy, and join me for this reading of our second to last piece in Dancing the Dream. And it is called That One in the Mirror. That one in the mirror. I wanted to change the world, so I got up one morning and looked in the mirror. That one looking back said, "There is not much time left. The earth is racked with pain. Children are starving. Nations remain divided by mistrust and hatred. Everywhere, the air and water have been fouled almost beyond help. Do something." That one in the mirror felt very angry and desperate. Everything looked like a mess, a tragedy, a disaster. I decided he must be right. Didn't I feel terrible about these things too, just like him? The planet was being used up and thrown away. Imagining earthly life just one generation from now made me feel panicky. It was not hard to find the good people who wanted to solve the Earth's problems. As I listened to their solutions, I thought, there is so much goodwill here, so much concern. At night before going to bed, that one in the mirror looked back at me seriously. "Now we'll get somewhere," he declared, "if everybody does their part." But everybody didn't do their part. Some did, but were they stopping the tide? Were pain, starvation, hatred, and pollution about to be solved? Wishing wouldn't make it so, I knew that. When I woke up the next morning, that one in the mirror looked confused. "Maybe it's hopeless," he whispered. Then a sly look came into his eyes, and he shrugged. "But you and I will survive. At least we are doing all right." I felt strange when he said that. There was something very wrong here. A faint suspicion came to me, one that had never dawned so clearly before. What if that one in the mirror isn't me? He feels separate. He sees problems out there to be solved. Maybe they will be, maybe they won't. He'll get along. But I don't feel that way. Those problems aren't out there, not really. I feel them inside me. A child crying in Ethiopia, a seagull struggling pathetically in an oil spill, a mountain gorilla being mercilessly hunted, a teenage soldier trembling with terror when he hears the planes fly over. Aren't these happening in me when I see and hear about them? The next time I looked in the mirror, that one looking back had started to fade. It was only an image after all. It showed me a solitary person enclosed in a neat package of skin and bones. Did I once think you were me? I began to wonder. I am not so separate and afraid. The pain of life touches me, but the joy of life is so much stronger, and it alone will heal. Life is the healer of life, and the most I can do for the earth is to be its loving child. That one in the mirror winced and squirmed. He hadn't thought so much about love. Seeing problems was much easier, because love means complete self-honesty. Ouch. Oh, friend, I whispered to him, do you think anything can solve problems without love? That one in the mirror wasn't sure. Being alone for so long, not trusting others and being trusted by others, it tended to detach itself from the reality of life. Is love more real than pain? He asked. I can't promise that it is, but it might be. Let's discover, I said. I touched the mirror with a grin. Let's not be alone again. Will you be my partner? I hear a dance starting up. Come. The one in the mirror smiled shyly. He was realizing that we could be best friends. We could be more peaceful, more loving, more honest with each other every day. Would that change the world? I think it will, because Mother Earth wants us to be happy and to love her as we tend her needs. She needs fearless people on her side, whose courage comes from being part of her, like a baby who is brave enough to walk because Mother is holding out her arms to catch him. When that one in the mirror is full of love for me and for him, there is no room for fear. When we were afraid and panicky, we stopped loving this life of ours and this earth. We disconnected. Yet, how can anybody rush to help the earth if they feel disconnected? Perhaps the earth is telling us what she wants, and by not listening, we fall back on our own fear and panic. One thing I know, I never feel alone when I am Earth's child. I do not have to cling to my personal survival as long as I realize day by day that all of life is in me. The children and their pain, the children and their joy, the ocean swelling under the sun, the ocean weeping with black oil, the animals hunted in fear, the animals bursting with the sheer joy of being alive. This sense of the world in me is how I always want to feel. That one in the mirror has his doubts sometimes, so I am tender with him. Every morning I touch the mirror and whisper, "Oh friend, I hear a dance. Will you be my partner? Will you be my partner? Come." Wow. Okay, so this piece, I did not remember the details of it, but having just reread this now, I'm really touched by it. I really enjoy and appreciate this piece and what Michael is saying in it. I have to say, I know I've mentioned this in the past, but sometimes it really feels like a kind of kismet when I record one of these episodes and the piece is so closely related in a way to something I have been thinking about or feeling recently. Just this morning, I was journaling a bit and I started to reflect on how weird it would be if someone in the future were to read my journal, and how sad it would be that my journal could be a window into life in 2025, because frankly, there's a lot of silliness in there that I don't think would be all that helpful. But anyway, I started to think about this and I found myself apologizing to future people and saying, I'm sorry I didn't do more at this time. I'm sorry. And it was because I was thinking about, and of course I went on to write about this, I was thinking about an article I saw this morning about the Great Coral Reef and how its destruction is signaling one of the first and most substantial signs of true environmental collapse. and how this is kind of aligning with multiple other articles and headlines I've seen this last year that have said it's now too late to reverse climate change, or it's too late to really do much at all in terms of restoring what once was. And I can only imagine that people in the future, when they look back at this time, will wonder what was going on. Why did people not do more? Look at how they used to have it. Like I saw recently somebody talking about how like we need to preserve the memory of what it's like, depending of course where you live in the world, but what it's like to have snow, or what it's like to have Octobers get cold, because it's changed in the last 20 and 30 years. It's totally changed. And it has changed, it has changed. And anyway, I was thinking about all of this and how my own kind of like, am I doing enough? And I was recalling and journaling about this, like, what more could I be doing? What am I doing wrong? How am I contributing? What can I do in my kind of limited power supply? What could I do? And then I read this piece, and it's kind of startling when this kind of alignment happens. I always wonder about it, like, how did this come to be this way, And so this piece being about this kind of self-reflection, like literally and figuratively about self-reflection, and not allowing that part of ourselves that gives us a pass, reminding us like, oh, this is okay. It doesn't really affect you. Or it's okay. What more can you, you can't really do anything. Or, well, this is inevitable. Like not allowing that part of ourselves to rule the conversation, to question it and challenge it and offer another way. I don't know. It was very interesting to me. So there's a lot to say about this piece and dive into. First of all, I just loved reading an essay from Michael again. This type of reflection in prose was just like a wonderful joy. I feel like that every time he kind of switches genres. It's a wonderful joy to get to read such a personal essay from him, where there's not so much to interpret, but more to just internalize, to really let sink into our own view of ourselves in the mirror. I mean, I don't know. Maybe today we should all look in the mirror and try to have a conversation with who's looking back the way he does here. I think there's something really powerful about that, because too often that reflection in the mirror is more about what the physical outside looks like and not enough of the actual looking inward that he's talking about here. There's a lot I want to say, so let's go through the piece bit by bit again and see what specific parts we can really pull out of here. I mean, it's clear that overall, the message and the kind of thesis of this piece is that we need to look inward. That we need to look inward and challenge ourselves, hold ourselves accountable as being a part of the solution, and use that love that we have within us to nurture both ourselves and through that, the world around us. But there's so much more here, and that's, if that's the main idea, I want to break down kind of the methods in which he achieves that or gets to that. Because it's a slightly longer piece, I of course won't go through every line, or reread all of it, but I do want to point out a couple of different sections that we'll move through from the beginning. So in the first line of this piece, Michael says, "I wanted to change the world, so I got up one morning and I looked in the mirror." This, of course, I think for anybody who's a fan of Michael Jackson will immediately make you think about the song Man in the Mirror. And we can kind of predict where this would go from there, given the themes of that song and how it aligns here. But I really like that he starts here. I wanted to change the world, so I looked in the mirror. Of course, what I like about this phrasing is that it presupposes that to change the world, the first step is to look inward. He doesn't beat that over your head, though. He makes this sound like the most natural and necessary first step, which I just really appreciate, because it kind of breaks it down and simplifies. And then from here, he goes on throughout the piece to have this kind of conversation within himself. And what I really like about that is that when you read this whole book, and there's multiple pieces, especially about how, oh, we must all love each other, we must all have love, and we must care about animals and care about people and care about children. And there's all these things, and they're beautiful. But by the time we reach the end, it would be easy to convince yourself that Michael, the author of this book, and Michael Jackson, the megastar, is a person who does not struggle with these issues internally. A person who you can kind of elevate to believing, he's so good and he's so wise and he's all these things. I mean, at least I can, and I do sometimes. But what I like about this piece is that instead of closing this book with this sense of like, I already have all the answers, he's closing this book with, it's a struggle and it's a battle, and here is a snapshot into mine, And so he continues here with this dialogue with his mirror self. We have to do something. It's almost too late. The world is falling apart. So that kind of anxiety and urgency that comes from the inner voice, that inner part of us that catastrophizes everything. And while there's reason to feel that there is catastrophe here, my point is more that the inner voice so often does do that to us, no matter what the context is. It makes it all feel hopeless, And hopelessness can very easily manifest in action, right? And so he says, the one in the mirror felt very angry and desperate. I thought he must be right. So again, what I'm was just alluding to here, that kind of anxiety can take over our full vision of the world. And it's in a lot of ways easier to give into it, as painful as it is. It is easier to give into such anxiety and accept that those inner voices must be correct about things than question them. And it's in this paragraph that he's really separating himself from the one in the mirror. So there's the Michael who's standing in front of the mirror and the one that's looking back at him. And his distinction between these, obviously when I'm reading it, I'm literally imagining it in like a literal figure in a mirror in a conversation there. But I know what he's really saying is that inner self, that inner voice. I've described this kind of in other episodes as the real human self and the more elevated self. And by that I mean the human self is the one that is kind of flawed and struggles a lot. And the more elevated self is the one that really kind of knows better and can kind of help guide the human self through if you just listen to it. That's like how I sort of see this conversation going back and forth, but how all of you can get wrapped up in that thinking if you listen to the one too much, So then he discusses how listening to great thinkers and people who have solutions and proposals to solutions and things, it can make you feel better. It can make you feel better, like people care, people are doing great. And both sides of himself, the human self, the elevated self, the one in the mirror and the one standing in front of it, both sides took comfort in this idea. People are doing their part. So long as everybody does, then, we'll be okay. And I think so often, at least I feel like this too, like when there is a strong and smart and proud voice out there that is leading the charge to make a change, whether that is like a political figure or an activist or even a celebrity, having a voice out there that is powerful and strong and confident and proposing solutions, it feels comforting to imagine the world in which those people exist. Like, oh, thank God. It's not just all of us who can't do anything, like there's somebody there leading the charge. Now we can all just follow along. But as he says, and I mean, this part makes me sad, but it's just the truth. But everybody didn't do their part. And even those that did, were they really stopping the entire system? And I don't know, it makes me think about, like, recently I've been really into watching these documentaries on YouTube. They're from really cool different channels around the world that do investigative journalism in different countries and exploring different social issues in those countries. And I'll see things in these places. I'll see the lifestyle. I'll see the ways that people are living around the world. And I'll feel really overwhelmed by just the vastness of the problems in the world. Just the vastness of the suffering that at any given moment we can snap and we can look and see it. And if you're not in the place, which I hope you're not, in a place where you're personally suffering, then there's, for me at least, there's kind of a sense of guilt about it, of like this inequity of resources and how I have so much more than others have. But all of that could kind of dig into your brain and make you feel really sort of hopeless about things. It's like, okay, not everybody is going to do their part. There will always inevitably be people who don't, and that might include us too. But then there's also the fact that even if everyone did do their part, it's hard to imagine how all of these problems would go away. I mean, theoretically they could, sure, but it's like I was talking about recently with the utopia concept. Like, it's so outside of the realm of possibility in a way that it can be this hopeful thing to imagine. But sometimes it's like, well, why are we even striving when we know this isn't possible? And that complication is, I think, part of what he's capturing here. But I would suggest the most important part of this section, when he's sort of realizing out loud, like, not everybody's going to do their part. Not everybody is doing their part. Is when the one in the mirror says to him, maybe it's hopeless, but you and I will survive. At least we're doing all right. And this is, to me, the turning point of the whole poem, because I would suggest that for a lot of people, this is where the conversation ends. And perhaps this part of the conversation, the lead up of, oh my God, the world's horrible. Oh my God, it's terrible. Let's look to other people for inspiration. Let's get inspired and then be disappointed that things aren't better. But hey, at least we're okay. That cycle, I think it's a natural cycle. So it's not a fault of anyone specifically. But that cycle is one we can get trapped in for our entire lives. And so many of us do. But this is where the narrative really shifts, where the one in the mirror is not controlling the narrative or the conversation anymore. Because Michael steps back and he questions that, because he says, like, no, if others aren't okay, then I will not be okay either. And he's reflecting on children crying in Ethiopia and animals suffering in oil spills. And, he's reflecting on all these things and saying, I feel these things deep inside of me. Those things don't stop affecting me just because I'm not going to be hurt by them. And it made me think of this quote by the poet Audre Lorde. And she said, I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. I take and I find a similar meaning here for Michael. While we may not all be, as privileged economically as Michael Jackson was, many of us, most of us, will have some privilege in our lives above others around us or others around the world. I mean, most of us are not operating from like the human rock bottom, right? So if we're coming from that position, we may be able to convince ourselves that we're not really affected by the bad things that are happening in this world, or like we're not really a part of it. But I feel like what he's saying here, and what is in the Audre Lorde quote that I just shared, is this idea that even if you are not personally being shackled, you're not personally being oppressed, you're not personally being affected, you're not personally a crying child in Ethiopia or a bird harmed by an oil spill, when you feel connected to and allow yourself not to disconnect and remove yourself from our interconnectedness to those beings around the world, those others around the world, you too will begin to feel shackled. You'll begin to feel a sense of like, I need to fight for and on behalf of all of these people and creatures in this land. Like what Audre Lorde said, I am not free while any woman is unfree. So what Michael might say is, I am not okay so long as any other being is not okay. And that's where the narrative shifts, because if you stop convincing yourself that you're okay with all of it, then you can actually start taking action. You know what I mean? Like if you are focused on and comfort yourself with, well, hey, I'm not affected by this at least. Whew, thank God. You can convince yourself it doesn't really matter to do anything in the future, you know? So I like that we're getting that shift where he's kind of fighting back against that inner voice and standing up and being like, no, actually, it's not okay to convince myself of this, because the reality is I am still affected. It is still a problem. And honestly, I could say that is probably true for everyone. We just delude ourselves into thinking otherwise, you know? We just kind of hide it from ourselves and allow ourselves to feel that disconnect. But like I've said this before, I think Michael has implied this before, like energy is energy. So the negative energy and the pain in this world will touch us in some way, even if it feels disconnected from us, you know? Like the butterfly effect is a thing. I think it exists energetically. And so he says, aren't these things happening in me when I hear and see about them? And he uses this moment of real connectedness to the world to transition into a newer view of himself, in which he's looking in the mirror and he notices the image in the mirror is starting to fade away. And I think this serves a multitude of purposes, this moment here. On one hand, he's saying, the more I see myself as connected to everyone else and everything else, I am not solitary. And so the image of the solitary self starts to fade. The reality of the human ego, of the sort of self-centeredness of individuality that comes with self-isolation from the rest of the world, with convincing yourself that somehow you are not affected, that starts to fade. The ego starts to fade. The image of the self starts to fade. But he's also saying something else. He's saying, it was only an image after all. It showed me a solitary person enclosed in a neat package of skin and bones. Did I once think you were me? And I love this part because it just kind of calls attention to the silliness of all of it. You know, like, of course, it's silly to overly identify with the physicality of us, the physical space of our skin and our bones, and to overly identify with that as being somehow representative of us. But there's something really nice to me about hearing Michael say this, because, I mean, it's no secret, and we all know Michael really struggled in a lot of ways with his self-image, with his insecurity about his appearance, and it obviously affected him deeply. Now, on one hand, I do think we'll never quite know what that was like for him, because, you know, a person that sees a kind of separateness between their physical embodiment and their spirit might also not be as affected by insecurity, but still say, hey, you know, I know other people will be affected by this, so I'm going to make changes to that appearance or whatever. But let's just assume Michael's like any other person who has insecurity and was under a tremendous amount of pressure to look and be a certain way. And so he followed that. It comforts me to know that while obviously I see Michael as very wise and very, you know, knowing of a lot and extremely self-reflective, of course he knows, as we all do, that your appearance doesn't really matter that much. Obviously he cared. And so it's comforting in a way to know that he did deep down sort of understand the silly and unnecessary pain that comes with overly identifying with your physical form and caring too much about that as representative of you. So it's kind of funny to me to think about this moment for him where obviously on a very deep level, he's like, you know, my image is fading because the self is not as important when I think about the whole. But it's also interesting because the attachment we might have to that physical self can also fade when we step back and look at it and are like, this is just a package of skin and bone. You know what I mean? And it makes me think about, and you know, if you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, maybe you can predict this, but of course it makes me think about the Ebony Jet interview from 1987, which I've probably referenced on 15 different episodes. If by now I haven't played all of it for you, then that is a miracle. But I am going to play a brief clip from that in which the interviewer is asking Michael about how he feels when he looks in the mirror. And it's of course in relation to the song Man in the Mirror. But I think you can sense some of Michael's hesitancy with this question, and then his seeming, maybe relief, or maybe not relief, but comfort in answering it when it comes down to being about more of a statement of how he views the world. So I want to just briefly play this clip for you.
My favorite song on the album is Man in the Mirror.
Oh yeah, I like that a lot.
That's my favorite song. I tend to hold a feeling that no matter what you do in the world, it really has to start with you.
It's my philosophy too. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change.
Is it hard to do?
Yeah, well, people don't look at themselves honestly. They don't look at themselves and point the finger at them. It's always the other guy's fault or somebody else. You should change yourself. Look at yourself. Make better of yourself, you know?
When you look in the mirror, are you happy with what you see?
In what way?
Just when you look there, in terms of that social philosophy.
I'm never totally satisfied. I always wish the world could be a better place. No, not at all. Hopefully, that's what I do with my music, bring happiness to people and to bring joy and some peace in their lives.
What I really like about this clip is that I personally, given how respectful the interview was as a whole, I don't think that Daryl, the interviewer, was actually trying to get into Michael's brain about his physical insecurities and kind of poke fun at him about that. I genuinely don't think that. I really think he was looking at it. At least I don't want to believe that. I don't want to believe that, especially given the conversation they'd had until this point. But I do like that not only does this conversation reinforce the message of the song Man in the Mirror, it completely mirrors, pun intended, it completely mirrors this piece as well, where he says, I'm never satisfied, which of course we know he also applied to his physical appearance. I'm never satisfied. I always wish the world could be a better place. And this just no, of course I'm not. Of course I'm not okay with things. I think someone like Michael, who writes so much, especially in this book, about love and how beautiful life is and how we should all love each other and heal the world together and all this stuff, it can sound so idealistic, so utopian, but he was a realist at the same time. He was a realist. He was living in the real world at the same time. But why would he lead with that? When he's trying in his role to inspire change, to inspire people, why would he lead with how unhappy it all makes him and how hard it all is? Of course, he's going to lead more with, hey, we can all do our part. We can all stand up and make change. Let's all come together and do this thing. And that's kind of how I see this piece, where so much of this book where, there's been many pieces in this book in which he is asking us to think and take action and all these things. But there's been a lot of pieces where he presents a very utopian view of life. And I like that in this piece, he's showing the kind of fissures within himself where there are cracks and there are challenges and he has to actively work on them and not distract himself by the upset in the world, but to actively embrace, hey, this sucks and it's upsetting to me, but I need to stop just thinking about myself. And that's not just then about taking action. It's about changing the way you actually think about the world, So in this whole section, he says something I find really interesting. He says, seeing problems is much easier because love means complete self-honesty. Ouch. First of all, the ouch is adorable, but the complete self-honesty, that's tough. And I like that he says this because I think in the context of this piece, the self-honesty comes with recognizing, one, what you are doing and not doing, but two, recognizing that you're not separate. And so it's a delusion to say otherwise. That's the way I take it in the context of this piece. And I just like it as a general sentiment, though. It's easier to be truly negative about the world when you are not being honest, or even about yourself when you're not being honest. I mean, we can hold ourselves accountable, honestly, but being completely honest with ourselves is also being honest about the good and the bad, not just the bad, our flaws and our strengths. So he begins to have this conversation with the one in the mirror and saying, don't you think we need love, basically, to solve the problems? And the one in the mirror is fearful and nervous and says, is love more powerful than pain? And is kind of having like a kind of existential crisis, you know? And what I like about this is that it's showing Michael doing something that I have been told and taught in therapy, but is very difficult to do, which is to parent yourself and to talk yourself down through a loving parental voice and treat you the way you wish you could have another person comfort you and love you, like a parental figure. And to hear this kind of in real time through this conversation is really sweet. It's not this self-critical voice. It's a voice of love and compassion that is being applied to this one in the mirror, the one that he sees as his self, or used to at least see as himself. So maybe the more human side of him. And I just think it's a really sweet exchange back and forth where he says, you know, I don't know if love is stronger than pain, but it might be, and we can discover that together. So kind of reuniting this more elevated, knowledgeable, truthful self with his more human self, so that reunification can result in both of them elevating in their own way, sort of proving that to do the work on yourself, or however you want to think about it, to do the work to improve and grow is worth it. And there is a method for it, but it's very challenging, but it's worth it, you know? So he goes on to say what I think is probably the one on anyone's mind when they're reading a piece like this. Would this be enough to change the world? And he says, I think it is, because Mother Earth wants us to be happy and to love her as we tend her needs. She needs fearless people on her side whose courage comes from being part of her, like a baby who is brave enough to walk because Mother is holding out her arms. So I guess sort of saying, when we live in a kind of fear, and that makes it difficult for us to take any kind of action, when it makes it difficult for us to see things clearly about our connectedness, like when we're just trying to comfort ourselves with the delusion, so to speak, that we don't feel that pain and that pain doesn't affect us if it's not happening to us. When we step away from that, we can actually experience less fear if we embrace what life really is and embrace the joy of life along with the hardship. I don't know, there's a lot of different points here I think he's making, but I think it maybe can be summed up in this line he says, where he writes, when we were afraid and panicky, we stopped loving this life of ours and this earth. So the more we give into those fears and we are anxious and miserable and unhappy, the less we love ourselves, the less we love others, and the less we love the earth. And it does sort of make sense, because love, a deep love, absolutely drives the strongest sense of protection. I mean, people always say the strongest protective instincts are parent to child, or, you know, mother to child is often how people talk about it. And perhaps that's because it's a constant thing. It's a constant awareness and an inability to deny that love because it is so intrinsic. And what he's saying is, through recognizing our connectedness to everything, we can reestablish that sense of love, and we can operate from that place of love, so that when it comes to it, we can do everything we need to do. But it's easier to convince yourself you don't care about things than it is to do that. And he ends with this idea of we're all things. We're the animals that are joyfully in love with life, and we're the animals that are suffering under being hunted. You know, like we're the good and the bad at all times. And we connect to those things at all times. But the ultimate conclusion here is that when it comes to really making any kind of change, we cannot allow ourselves to separate from everything else, or to live our life divided between that more elevated, knowledgeable self and that very afraid human self. We can't allow ourselves to really believe we are just that singular figure in the mirror and that's all that matters, because it's not true. At least that's how I'm taking what he's saying. And I found this really helpful today. And one thing I really appreciate about Michael, that I know I've touched upon this quite a bit, but Michael and his sensitivity and the way he talks about his own attachment and feelings about the world and his own sensitivity and his own empathy, it makes it feel like a beautiful and powerful thing. to be a person who is so deeply affected by the world, and to be a person who's not afraid to embrace the goodness of the world while also challenging the real ugliness there too. He makes me feel, as I said all the way back in episode 11, when we talked about enough for today, he makes me feel like I am not alone, and like it is okay to be this way. Like this is how we ought to be. And it's a really nice feeling to me that he is doing this in this entire book, but that as he's ending it especially, he is offering so many insights with so much honesty, and again, that's how I feel about this piece, is showing those parts of himself that might feel a little bit bitter or a little disenchanted with life. And then his way of coming through it, it's just inspirational. It's inspirational to not allow yourself to get totally dragged down by it all. And to stand up and show up is inspirational. And as always, Michael inspires me all the time. So depending on how I edit this episode, I'm just going to go on a limb and say this one was a bit longer than normal. But I guess I just have so much to say about Michael right now. And I guess also with the conclusion of this book, it's just difficult for me to imagine being done with it. I feel such connection to it now, and I'm feeling a sense of sadness about that coming to an end soon. But for now, we are going to close today's episode. It has been wonderful to be here with you today to reflect on this piece. I just love this man so much. I don't even know what to do about it. When I read this piece and this kind of piece, I'm like, of course I'm obsessed with him. Of course I think he's the greatest person ever, because look at him and look at the things he says. He's just a brilliant, wonderful person. And it is so wonderful to have these pieces to sit with. So I hope that you're enjoying this as well. And I look forward to our next episode, which will be our last piece that we will be discussing in Dancing the Dream. And I'm just so sad, but I look forward to that. That'll be next week. Thank you so much for joining me today and for your attention and patience and everything else. I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Have a wonderful week and weekend, and we will talk soon. Take care.